next session, we have a panel discussion. It's on a very interesting topic. And we all several times have this question, what is the formula behind successful startups? So it is going to be on startup DNA, that's the formula behind successful startups. And for that, we have amongst us Mohit Arora, who is going to moderate this session. Thank you, Mohit. We have Pankaj Bansal, and we have Anand Narayanan. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Pankaj is co-founder and chief executive officer, PeopleStrong, visionary. Pankaj is passionate about technology and truly believes in that HR will take leap into the next orbit by embracing technology. Anand is chief product officer at Simply Learn, a product leader and deep experience in building products across various industries and product types. Anand leads product and vision roadmap and delivery at Simply Learn. We also have Mohit amongst us. Mohit is partner at Narayanan Group. Mohit Arora is partner at Narayanan Group Singapore, where he is responsible for shaping business strategy and driving growth for investee companies across Asia. He works with management teams for these companies to identify value creation and strategies. Thank you, gentlemen. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Malik.
Thank you.
A very good afternoon to all of you. I believe that we are running a little behind schedule, so I have been asked to kind of compress the session into about 20 minutes. We'll try our best to do that, but I think many of you who are startups out here would like to learn and understand a lot from both these gentlemen who are sitting on my other side in terms of how they have actually done it. So I have on my left Pankaj. Pankaj has been, I was talking to him before coming in out here, and basically he has been at it from day one and has actually today successfully transformed his company into a global company. Looking at the operations, looking at people issues, business issues, vision issues, leadership issues in a big way. And on my right is Anand, who is somebody who worked in the US for a fairly long time before he came back to India to join Simply Learn and has seen a massive transition in that company over the past couple of years, growing from about 300 odd to about 1,000 plus today. So I think there is a lot of learning that will be shared today. We will try and get at least one or two questions towards the end, but let me start really, Pankaj, with you. So starting and looking at the topic that we have currently, which is the DNA of a successful startup. So what is it?
Thank you, Mohit, for this question. I'm so glad that we have still more people downstairs than people here on the stage. So it's afternoon, and this topic, I'm sure many people come here and share their perspective. But very quickly, if I say three things, if you ask from a startup which can scale up, one is how strong the team is. That's my first yardstick. I just look at the team and figure out how easy or tough it has been for them. Team doesn't mean only the executive team. Team doesn't mean the people who are delivering. But team means also the advisors. Team also means the board. Mm-hmm. I'm very surprised most of the startups don't have that. On PeopleStrong, I remember on day one, we were 4 people and we had 3 board members. But that has helped us the most. So that's one element. Second element I look at is the top line growth. And I'm not going to focus on bottom line. I'm not saying that bottom line is bad, but I'm saying top line is more important than anything else when it comes to startup, and we don't get it. And third is what I call the equity ratio. I'm again not saying that if you have more equity, it's bad, but it just reflects that you've not shared enough. You've not raised enough capital. You've not shared it with enough employees. So these are 3 ways I look at how the startup is thinking. What are the probability of its scaling up? That's my very quick answer.
Great. So, I mean, looking at the overall companies, both of you are representing companies which are essentially product companies. So looking at the success formula behind successfully launching a product company, where I think many of the people sitting in the audience, maybe, I'm not completely aware of the audience profile, but looking at it, what really is the essential ingredient to ensure that you have a successful product company out there?
Yeah, so I think, I'll add to some of the things that Pankaj said, which very strongly resonates with me. I'll add the things that I think will be further down in your list, which are still very important, right? See, fundamentally, there is an easy trap that companies can fall into, which is either they go in one direction, which is the product, right? We're going to build a great product, the perfect product that everybody will want, and you take too much time actually building the product and taking it to market. So that's one trap. The other trap is to say, look, we're going to sell and sell and sell, and sales and marketing is really the focus of the company. So I think there's the first thing which I think is really important, which is first figure out which stage of growth you are in, and figure out where that balance lies, because you cannot in the early stage create this perfect product. You actually want to put something out and quickly experiment and iterate there, right? But once you figure out the formula, then it's very important to scale and perfect your product, right? So figure out where in the journey you are in that growth and then figure that out. And a Simply Learn story really quick, if you think of the first 4 or 5 years, it was a lot of iteration. In fact, we started out as a classroom provider, and then we iterated the product to become purely digital online delivery, because we knew that that's what the customers were asking for, and we could provide a much better service at that. So that's one big part, right? The second is it's easy to say sales and marketing have specific metrics and they'll be metrics driven, but maybe some of the other teams like HR or product, they don't have real metrics to measure. And that is actually a big fallacy and it's a mistake, right? So I think one thing I have seen personally work really well at Simply Learn is every team has specific metrics and is very performance driven. Every quarter we look at those metrics and we look at how we have progressed to them. So for example, 2 metrics that I care about very deeply is, do my students actually complete the course, and do they complete it with a very high level of satisfaction? 2 metrics, and we measure that with every student that comes in, and we have measured it for the last 9 years since the company's been around. So be very, very performance oriented, that's super important. And the third is, it's very easy over time when you have a lot of successes to say, we got the perfect product, now let's just make micro iterations. One thing I have seen successfully done at Simply Learn is we disrupt ourselves all the time. And if we hear that a customer wants something which is different from what we have, as long as it is with the bigger vision of what the company is trying to do, we're completely comfortable saying, look, we're going to run a pilot, which is quite different from what we've done in the past. And if that pilot works and it measures right, why not change the entire business and go towards that direction, right? So customer first is really the story that I want to tell here. So if you want to build a great product, if you have these 3 ingredients, typically you can't go wrong.
Great. I think clearly, from the area that I come from, which is the automotive industry where I worked for a very long time, clearly customer and the voice of customer is clearly in the center of anything and everything that we need to do to be successful. And I think that's exactly what you're resonating. So coming back to you, Pankaj, I mean, one of the things that I was talking to you about was in terms of and you also mentioned it just now, the teams, the advisors that you need to have. Now, how do you build a winning team? I mean, how do you really ensure that these people, you build them in the first place, are retained with you? How do you ensure that they are, continuously recognized? Because again, I think one of the challenges that the industry faces today is in terms of the manpower crunch and the fact that there is a manpower turnover that is so pronounced. So how do you really build and retain a winning team?
I'm not getting paid for it, still I will share what I can. But jokes apart, I think it's the toughest $1 million, $1 billion question that every enterprise fails, right? And you may be small, you may be big. This is a standard challenge that everyone has. And whatever you succeed in becomes a strategy. But I'll just share 4 things with you. One is the sheer sharing, and I'll keep coming back to this sharing element. Whether people are just shared the salary or it is the wealth that you share with them. So how that sharing is communicated to an employee. It can be stocks, it can be wealth. Like at PeopleStrong, we've given 275 people 4 years of salary guaranteed over next 1 year of salary over next 4 years. What I mean, it's like a wealth plan. It's like a long-term wealth plan. If you stay on, no questions asked, you will get this year's salary over next 4 years over and above your salary. Right? So I'm just sharing one small example. About a significant part of equity is with employees. Last year when HDFC and multiples took majority in PeopleStrong, almost 60 people built directly, indirectly, some kind of major wealth in their life. It was a great feeling when my office secretary walked up and said, okay, I have paid off my loans, right? From that 20% that each employee diluted when this event happened. So that's the sharing part. Second part is how you have defined roles which every year are being reached. Most of the time, if you made somebody HR head, he or she remains HR head for lifetime. It can't happen in startups. My HR head is now head of operations for my recruitment tech business. His name is Devashish. Right? Anyone who had joined PeopleStrong in the first 3 years are playing a role of practice head and above, at least have handled 4 major different verticals. So that's the second thing. Third is how do you go about positioning your organization? There are hundreds of tech companies in India. We are now 1,200 people. People said SAP, Oracle, you can't win. Traditional ERPs will win. What's the confidence? What's the story you're going to build in? How your office looks like? In name of startup, you can't operate from a dingy place. I'm just giving, this is period. This is my belief. You may say that it's wrong. I don't believe in that strategy at all. We also did not have money, but we made nicer offices. I'm not saying A+ class building. We operated from humble offices, but beautifully done. Fourth is how much time the startup CEO spends on culture. Like I spend 25 to 30 times, my 1/3 of time goes in managing culture and people. I've had an HR head when we were 3.5 years old. Still that person is with us, which is Devashish Sharma. Go and look up on the web. He's been a key person for us. So these are the 4 things I'll put on.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant because I think probably you should have a new title, Chief People Officer, right? So I think that's exactly what's being said. It's a people, that really transform the company, and that's really where the focus needs to be. Looking at, one of the areas which, let me just spend a little bit more time on this one with you, Pankaj. One of the things that you have also successfully done is raise fund. And I think, again, people sitting out here, struggle with when to do it, what is the right time, how do I do it. So of course there are some sessions which relate to that. But looking at from a founder's perspective and the mindset that should I be diluting, should I keep the control, how do you balance the needs of the company with the mindset of the founder?
So Mohit, first is that dilution is normal. Are you with me? If you will raise capital, dilution will happen. But isn't it lack of funding is terminal? I've had situations where we could have died if 3 days money wouldn't have hit the bank. So I'm telling you, dilution is normal, but lack of funding is terminal. Remember this statement that I earned on pretty early in my days, right? Second is people will come and tell you can't raise. You have to trust your model. People told me no one invests in HR. I'm talking way back 2005. We started company on day 1 with 30 lakh rupee capital, small, but the names that I took it matters the most. I took it from the top CHROs of the country, Santurp Mishra, Adesh Goel, my then boss. Quite a few people came together and funded it. That time there was no culture of angel capital. We've raised over 400 crores in the last 12 years in HR tech. Third thing is how your brand is being communicated outside. I've spent over 3 crore rupees to one consultant in last 12 years who've just done the design. 3 crore rupees PeopleStrong has paid. His name is Itu Chowdhury. He's one of the top brand guys. But it has helped me to position myself in front of the big boys. I was competing. Customers don't care whether you are SAP or PeopleStrong. Right. They want to make sure that they are as confident as with you as they were with any other traditional ERP. So that's the brand thing that helps you in raising. Third is what is the kind of return you can almost assure. I know you are giving equity, but what is the return you can do? The only way I learned is the capital is not only emotional equity, it's not only financial equity, it's also sweat equity. So people think only financial equity is what investors buy in. In early stage company, people buy in sweat equity and emotional equity. All my investors, after putting money, I leverage them like they're my sales guys. I'm telling you very shamelessly, and I told them when they were putting money, and they don't mind it because they put money in you, right? Why won't they help you? So it was my team's job to make sure that they're involved. They were at every event. They were positioned in market. They joined PeopleStrong as board of directors. So I leveraged them super heavily. So that's my way of looking at if you can't, after doing these things, if you think you can't raise, then the problem is in your team. Please look at your team rationally. If you think that people will put money only on you, you are wrong. People never put money on Pankaj Bansal. They put money on the 7 people they saw with me. And they realized these 7 can definitely create a magic. So I think this combination of the trail that I shared with you enables you to raise capital. Sounds easy, very hard, but it's doable. And you don't need to be a financial expert. I didn't know how to deal with Deepak Parekh. When I walked in, he understood that I'm not good at financials. He said, you're not good. I said, sir, apna dhanda samajh mein aata hai. I don't understand financials beyond a point. Ye samajh aata hai, kitne paise se business chala lenge. He funded. Today, Deepak is the biggest thing that happened to PeopleStrong or multiples who invested heavily.
Right. So and I think there are lots of learnings in what you just shared. Clearly, in terms of looking at, the collective win, if that is much bigger than the individual wins, then clearly, I think that is...
So there's an Urdu poet who says, "Khareed lo mujhko ya kharij kar do." Khareed lo mujhko ya kharij kar do, ye roz ba roz mujhe kiraye pe na chadhaya. Right? So I think this is the life of an entrepreneur when it comes to an entrepreneur.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so coming back to you, Anand, in terms of looking at, talked about, the founding, we talked about people, we talked about, the strategy, the fundraise, the leadership team. One of the big challenges or one of the big questions that comes up is in terms of go to market, looking at delivery systems, looking at marketing systems, footprint, India versus international markets. Again, you are somebody who has worked both, India as well as the US, and that's something which, from your perspective, what's your advice at this point of time, looking at, where the the startup is, what essential elements do they need to build in their DNA so that when the time comes, they are, they are not relearning. They are already tuned to get there.
Yeah, and I think there's a bit of what I consider hard skills and soft skills that I have seen. And by the way, just some context, I have worked at various size companies. I've worked at 110,000 people companies and 300 people company, right? So you see the contrast of how DNA changes over time. And I've worked at 5,000 people company as well, right? So let me talk about the soft skills first. What I found is really different about what we have built, which has allowed us to scale very quickly, is absolutely zero politics at every level. Right, and I'm very proud of that. We get in a room, it's ugly. There are a lot of, people are yelling at the problem. They're not yelling at each other, yelling at the problem. But after you leave the room, nobody's going to say, look, Vivek said this, or Anand said this, and are you on my side? It doesn't happen, right? So building that kind of culture where you can trust the guys around you to make the right decision is so important. And that includes engineering. By the way, being a product guy with engineering and product management reporting into me, right? Actually, in every company that I've been at, product management, engineering actually don't see eye to eye, right? And this is one of those things that I've worked very hard, that if we are going a certain direction, it might be the wrong direction, it might be the wrong pilot we're doing, but we're all in it together. And we're going to build it, we're going to measure it, we're going to figure out whether it works or not, right? So building that kind of team chemistry is super important in my mind, which is the sort of soft skill side. On the hard skill side, see, I think, we talked about performance-driven, culture. The first part of that is, I don't think there is too early for measuring what you're doing in the field, right? So when we started Simply Learn, and even today, any new product that comes out, any new service that comes out, anything new we try, the data is the first thing we build, right? The analytics platform is there. We know exactly what the customers are doing. We're looking at their behavior, and we actually measure, is this actually even worth going further? So that's very important. The third thing is, if you have these systems built in, it becomes very easy to run pilots, right? So when you talk about getting in new markets or new industries or new regions, run a very small pilot, run it in a way that you can actually measure very specific metrics that you call out in the beginning. And if those metrics show promise, then you scale it a little more, and then you scale it a little more, right? So what we have basically been able to do is, because the whole companies are tuned to a certain, we are going to go fast, we're going to make a lot of mistakes, and that's absolutely fine, but we're going to measure those mistakes. And if those are clearly mistakes based on data, then we're all aligned, we're going to change direction, right? So I think, while this is very simple stuff, I have seen companies really struggle with this, where they don't measure it. It's very subjective. Somebody says, I believe this is true, and everybody just either agrees or disagrees. It's a very subjective conversation, right? Take the subjectivity out of it. Look at what the customers are saying, and do these pilots and actually measure that. So that'll be my 2 cents of limited wisdom that I can provide here.
I think it's brilliant, because clearly I think most of the times we don't look at the data. We're just dealing with opinions. And I think taking the subjectivity out is extremely important. So let me come back to you, Pankaj, I think for one of the last couple of questions, because I do see the time running out there. Now, if you look at the DNA, that's, for all of us sitting out here, we never chose it, right? We were born with it. But should God give you the power to go back in time and say, which genes of your organization would you like to change? Or which genes would you like to have additionally, would you have had additionally? Is there anything that you would like to do different?
So I'm going to discuss a lot this topic at 4 o'clock on hall number 7, first floor. So this is the best session. That is the second best session, right? So you can come there. But if in a minute, if I have to answer, one is, I think tolerance. I would change tolerance. In name of democracy, we are a very democratic company. Our teams have stayed on. Average tenure of people is 5, 7, 10 years out of the 12-year story. So I think I would have just reduced that tolerance a bit. And parted with some people at the right time. I stayed on with them for a year more, 2 years more. That hurts the company the most. If you know there is a darkness at the end of the tunnel, you better run towards it and face that darkness than putting a topic under the carpet. It's like a divorce staring at your face, but you keep delaying it, it just increases the pain. So that's one thing I would like to change further at PeopleStrong. Secondly, we never learned how to raise debt. I don't know about you, but I didn't know. No one taught me. No bank agreed to give us debt. Today, everyone wants to give. We don't need it. When we wanted it, no one gave us the debt. So I still feel that our DNA, probably as an entrepreneur, one blame that I take is I did not know how to raise debt. And Deepak Parekh very often scolds me for that you lost so much of equity because you didn't know how to raise debt. But bygones are bygones. But if I had to change 2 things, I'll change these 2 things.
Great. I think more or less we have a few more seconds. And looking back, having worked with these...
Unless they come and push you out, you can continue.
So looking at, the DNA from what you see, for a company which may be, incorporated in a market like the US versus what you are seeing now out here? Are there certain elements that you would recommend to people out here that they should build this in their DNA?
Yeah, I think this is a little bit of an involved question. I can tell you there is a certain, and I'm going to be very blunt, and it may be politically incorrect, but I think I would rather just say it and say what I believe, right? See, fundamentally, when you build a product in the US versus when you build a product in India, one thing I clearly see different. We Indians are extremely tolerant, very tolerant, right? So the small flaws, the little challenges in the product, the consumer market in India will tell you, hey, these are the 3 problems I saw, but I love your product, right? If you take the same product to the US and you have these flaws and you're not able to really handhold that consumer through the entire process without a single glitch, you're in trouble. You're in trouble, absolute trouble, because people expect to exactly have step 1, step 2, step 3 charted out, right? And so we actually 40% of revenue comes out of the US, 40% out of India. So we have this challenge all the time. But one thing we have done successfully is we've acknowledged this problem. And wherever it matters to us the most, we have actually got very much a global thinking team. So for example, our design team is definitely a global thinking team. So when we build a platform, it hits the US psyche and it hits the Indian psyche. We do a lot of user testing, both in the US and India. We take our user feedback very seriously. We get close to 50,000 data points every month. And we actually look at what comes back by region, and we look at what actually happens there. That's another part. Then we look at the language we use. The language, while English in India is beautiful, language in English in US is beautiful, it's very different. So you got to have a globally consistent language when you do a curriculum or a course. So we actually have content editors that are globally aware. In fact, our content editor, the head is a PhD in American English, right? So you've got to pick those 3-4 places where you will not accept anything less than American standard in that sense, right? Because the bar is a little tougher there. So I think the point I'll put back to you is, if you think about the areas where you think are very core to your product and where people think differently, US and India, you need to invest there and make sure that is absolutely global standard.
Okay, great. I think we have kind of exhausted our 20 minutes, but honestly, just listening to both of you gentlemen, I have personally made multiple notes out here. I work with multiple startups at this point of time, but I'm sure each and everyone sitting out there, I'm sure you would have made your notes, because what is being said here is, while yes, many of us may know it in the subconscious, but understanding that managing by metrics, ensuring the right participation, making the right calls, even though they may be very hard upstream, and doing it right. These are just some of the pointers that we talked about. And again, while I have a summary out here, I don't want to go through it at this point of time. But honestly, it has been a great learning session for me personally, and
Absolutely.
I'm sure for the team present out here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mohit.
It was
Thank you,
absolutely, great and a lot of learning, and you were very candid, and I think your inputs were very valuable.
Yeah, so that's why I'm
Very
requesting
valuable.
everyone to come to Hall 7 now. I'm already scouting for it.
Super. Okay. So we have token of thanks for you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.